Welcome to Invisible Iceberg. Today we journey back to ancient Greece to uncover how the winds of change built an empire. Plus, discover the surprising connections between ancient battles and the shaping of modern America. And we dive into the fascinating mechanics behind the sea breeze. Today, we're exploring the connection of the weather and the people of ancient Greece. In fact, the word meteorology has its roots there. As a Mediterranean country relying on the seas for survival, the Greeks had a deep understanding of the weather, particularly the air and winds. In 480 BC, this knowledge was pivotal in saving the Greek Empire from an early demise. This is just one of the fascinating stories in the book, Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History. Joining us to talk more about how the Greeks used their insight into the weather is AccuWeather founder and executive chairman and author of the book, Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History, Dr. Joel Myers. Good to be with you, Dr. Joe. Thanks for joining us here.
My pleasure.
All right, let's talk first about the Greek Empire and when did the classical empire predominate?
300 to 500 BC, so a long time ago, 2,500 years ago, but it was very important in the history of mankind and in so many ways set the stage for what is now the United States.
They had a very good understanding, I understand, of the weather and especially wind where they were located.
All the Mediterranean countries were dependent for their prosperity on trade and ultimately the sea currents and the weather. Because as we know, over the water, the storms and harsh winds can be destructive if they're not prepared for them. So the Greeks invented the word meteorology and the basis of climatology. So they had understanding of that, and as well as an understanding of the variations in the winds, the first ones to use that for a certain matter of prediction.
So in 480 BC, it was the Persian king Xerxes that decided that he wanted to take over the Greek Empire. Let's talk first, before we get into the battle, let's talk about the sheer size of his army.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So the population of the world at that time, the entire world, estimated about 100 million people. And about 15 to 20 million of those people were in the Americas. Mm-hmm. And so even in that whole area, 80 million, including Asia and so on. So in that particular area, 250,000 man army. Think of it, the world's population, 100 million. So you're talking about 1/4 or 1% of the entire world's population. At a significant, many percent of the people alive in that part of the world in this Persian army with over 1,000 ships. And it was so powerful that he believed just showing up and letting them know he's coming for them, they would just surrender because it would be a huge loss of life.
Let's talk about the battle now between the Persians and the Greeks. Let's talk about the strategy, as the Persians thought that perhaps the Greeks would just surrender.
They did, but they weren't taking any chances. They had this huge army, this huge armada of ships, and they were coming. The Greeks knew they were coming because that was their strategy, to show such overwhelming force. Who would possibly challenge them? They thought they would walk in and take over. But what the Greeks knew about, very important, is the sea breeze and the land breeze. And as meteorologists, we understand that, and it's pretty easy to explain. So the water doesn't vary that much, water temperature from day to night. So during the day, the land is heated up. And so, as we know, hot air is lighter than cooler air, and so it rises. And that, as it rises, you know, there's a vacuum, so the cool air from the water comes in, and that's known as a sea breeze. And anybody who's been at the coast has often experienced that in mid-afternoon. Sometimes it can set in as early as 11 a.m. or noon. At night, you have the opposite effect. The land cools down, and so the water is warmer, and so there's a breeze from the land. outward. So using this cycle of, which were very familiar to the Greeks, and they knew the details along each shoreline, they took advantage of that fact in their strategy to defeat the Persians.
They moved north, according to the book of the Samalis Islands, between Piraeus and the Salamis Islands, and forced them into this narrow channel, and that's how they were defeated.
Well, partly. So the Greeks sort of telegraphed by letting the Persians intercept their plans, so that they would chase the Greeks where they thought they were going into this narrow channel, which was less than a mile wide. So this huge armada of ships is coming this way, and maybe the Persians didn't know all the details of the land and so on, at just the time that the wind would come and cause, and remember, the Persian ships were tall,
right,
and the Greek ships were small, so the big masts and so on, the wind would take it, cause chaos in the leading ships, and they crashed into each other, and there was the small isthmus, only less than a mile wide, and so, but the ships behind that were sailing didn't know. There was not communications like there is today, and so these ships crashing to each other and causing chaos. All the other ships then are continued to go forward and crash, and it was a mess. So the Persian army and the navy was completely befuddled. They lost 1/3 of their ships, a lot of their men, and they had no choice but to retreat, and the Greeks had won.
Just a fascinating story, Dr. Myers. Thanks for sharing it.
My pleasure.
Here with more perspective on the connection between weather and the Greek Empire is Barry Strauss. He's an author, historian, and a professor of history at Cornell University, as well as visiting fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. Thanks so much for joining us today, sir.
You're welcome. It's great to be here.
What role did the Greeks have in the history of weather?
They played a very important role in the history of weather. Early Greek thinkers speculated about weather and what the nature of the universe was. Was it air? Was it ice? Was it water? Was it fire? And their thoughts became much more sophisticated in the work of Aristotle, who wrote this famous book about weather called Meteorology, where he talks about the weather, he talks about earthquakes, he talks about natural phenomena. He's basing it on the thought of the Greeks and also the earlier civilizations in Babylonia and Mesopotamia and Egypt.
How did they contribute to the development of meteorology and the knowledge of climate?
Well, I would say through the fact that they approached it in a very analytical manner. They left the gods out of it. And so they brought the knowledge of weather to a higher level than it had been previously.
And why did Persia attack Greece in 480 BC?
Well, Persia attacked Greece in 480 BC in one sense because it was there. Persia was an empire. It was a conquering empire. It liked to expand. But also because the Greeks in what is nowadays the country of Greece had tried to liberate the Greek cities on the west coast of what is now Turkey. Those cities were under Persian rule. They rebelled against the Persian Empire. The Athenians in particular tried to help them against the Persians, but they failed, and the Persians were able to put down their rebellion. And so they wanted revenge on the Greeks, and they wanted to make sure the Greeks could never interfere in Persian affairs again.
How did the contributions of the Greek Empire lead to the formation of the Roman Empire?
Well, the Romans learned from the Greeks. They learned from the Greek city-states. They learned from their laws, from their thought, from their culture, from their citizenship. But they also learned from their imperialism. Alexander the Great, the most famous Greek speaker to conquer an empire, he and his successors built an empire that prided itself on its ability to absorb part of the local population and make them work for them, to become, for example, soldiers in their armies. The Romans learned from their Greek predecessors how to do this.
How are we still influenced today by the advancements from the Greek civilization?
We're influenced by the Greeks in many ways. The very notion of citizenship, and for that matter, of politics, which is a Greek word, comes from the Greeks. We get our notion of democracy and a constitutional republic from the Greeks. Some of our fundamental cultural ideals, above all philosophy, but also tragedy, comedy, and history. These come from the Greeks as well. And some of our basic notions of law and justice are also deeply influenced by the Greeks.
Barry Strauss, author, historian, professor at Cornell University, and visiting fellow at Stanford. Thanks again for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Still to come, we dive into the fascinating mechanics behind a sea breeze. But next, we explore how ancient battles played a role in shaping America today. Welcome back to Invisible Iceberg. I'm Bernie Rayno. We're back with AccuWeather founder and executive chairman and author of the book Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History, Dr. Joel Myers. We just went over a pivotal battle between the Greeks and the Persians, where weather was such an important factor and basically the X factor in determining that battle.
Absolutely. If you look at the numbers, the sheer numbers of the Persian Navy and all the forces and everything they mustered, you would say that if it was a football game, the Greeks had a 1% chance maybe of winning. But the Greeks won because of their superior knowledge of the winds and using that in a strategy to defeat this army and Navy that thought they would just walk in and should have, in terms of might, taken over. But it shows the importance of weather, knowledge and strategy, and using weather to your advantage. And that's always fascinated me. Long before I wrote the book, even when I was a teenager, and that's part of the reason I built AccuWeather, because that's what we do. We help businesses and companies, even football coaches, be prepared for weather and have an advantage that other people don't have. And sometimes it translates into millions of dollars in savings or benefit for businesses and companies. In this case, it saved the Greek Empire and set the stage for much of the civilization and the form of government we enjoy in the United States today.
Well, let's talk about that. How important was that battle to the future?
Well, look at what the Greeks developed. It was a very enlightened society. Sometimes it doesn't get the credit. We talk about the Romans and what our civilization came about, the Republic and such, but really the Romans took a lot from the Greeks. And when you look at what they did in Enlightenment in terms of mathematics and science and culture and architecture and form of government, the first republic and freedom for individuals and so many things. So this was important, very important, that the Greek Empire and their ideas survive and continue to thrive in terms of setting the stage for what we have in the United States today and other democracies. The word democracy came from the Greeks. So it was very important. And it was, as I said, if you look at it on paper, it was a 1% chance the Greeks would survive. But their superior knowledge of science, in this case, the weather and the sea breeze, made all the difference in the world for some of the things that we enjoy today.
Well, you had mentioned the United States. I want to touch on that again, how important or how much of some of the way in which the Greek ran their government we use today, or some of the ideas and concepts.
Absolutely. They came up with some of these ideas, which then the Romans adopted and were passed on and evolved in England and the UK over centuries. This is 2,500 years ago. And the basic concepts that they developed from nothing, there's no evidence of just a lot of creative thought. And clearly they had the prosperity to do so. It was a capitalistic system, trade and so on, and it gave them the prosperity to develop, have the spare time of the intelligent people to develop all these concepts, which then evolved in future civilization, was saved with the Romans and so on, and lead to the continued evolvement that we experience in the United States today.
When you look back at their knowledge and the lack of tools that they had, how impressed are you that they had such a unique understanding how the weather and wind would work in their area and how they used it to their advantage?
Well, part of their prosperity came about because of their knowledge of sea currents and the weather, and in this case, winning this battle against overwhelming odds. And they used it to their advantage in trade and shipping and all of that. So knowledge is power, and I certainly believe in that. And that's why scientific progress and knowledge and having superior knowledge of weather, even today, we see the companies we serve translates over time to billions of dollars in savings and reduced losses for companies. So knowledge is power, and scientific knowledge forms the basis of that.
So the Persians did not appreciate how important the weather can be. During your time here at AccuWeather, and when you built the business, was that a message that you really had to try to sell?
Absolutely, we're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of people think of weather as a commodity, but weather forecasts are not a commodity. At AccuWeather, it's not only the accuracy of the forecast, but communicating it effectively so the decision maker, whether it's a football coach, whether it's an operations person at a company in marketing or sales, or however they use it to get ahead of their competition and use insight and knowledge and weather intelligence to make more sales and to reduce losses. And that's what fascinates me, and that's what AccuWeather does for thousands of companies every day. And the public benefits from that in the forecast, the AccuWeather forecasts that are available on AccuWeather.com and in the AccuWeather app.
So the weather is just as important today as it was, well, thousands and thousands of years ago.
In some way, it's more important because we can be even more insightful, but the details matter, and we saw it there. Using the weather in a strategic way to win a battle that, when you looked at it on paper, the Greeks had maybe a 1% chance of winning.
Just another fascinating story about how weather and climate shaped history. I want to thank AccuWeather founder and executive chairman and author of the book Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History, Dr. Joe Myers, for joining us today.
My pleasure, Bernie.
Next, the fascinating mechanics behind a sea breeze. Welcome back to Invisible Iceberg. I'm Bernie Rayno. A sea breeze is any wind that blows from a large body of water toward a landmass. The mechanics of the sea breeze begin with a few basic meteorological concepts. 1, wind is generated by the difference in pressure. 2, the direction of the wind always moves from higher to lower pressure. And 3, large bodies of water heat and cool much slower than land, naturally producing a temperature or pressure difference over a small area. Now, sea breeze normally starts in the morning a few hours after sunrise, when the solar radiation heats the boundary layer over the land, while the water temperature remains nearly steady. This temperature difference between the land and the water results in a significant small-scale pressure gradient with lower pressure on land compared to the water. The sea breeze is formed as the air moves from higher to lower pressure. On many tropical and subtropical coastal regions, the sea breeze is a regular phenomenon throughout the year, while in cooler regions, the sea breeze is a common feature during the spring and summer, when the temperature difference between the land and sea is at its maximum. Sea breezes can not only impact temperature but weather. Since there is convergence along it, precipitation can occur. An example of this is the sea and Gulf breeze that ignites daily thunderstorms in Florida during the summer months. I want to thank AccuWeather founder and executive chairman and author of the book Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History, Dr. Joe Myers, for joining us today. For more information and get your copy of the book Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History, go to invisibleiceberg.com. And a big thanks to all of you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, send us an email at questions@AccuWeather.com, and we look forward to seeing you next time.